My name is Laura, and I'm 35 years old. Nothing could have prepared me for the sight I came home to that night. My parents, both in their 70s, were standing outside my own front door, shaking from the cold, their lips turning blue inside the house. My in-laws were holding an elegant dinner party filled with people I had never met before. My dad clutched his chest, still recovering from his recent heart surgery, and the thin layers of clothing he wore weren't nearly enough for the freezing weather. My mom could barely stay standing, her arthritis making every movement harder. In the cold air, what happened after that moment changed my life and theirs forever. Growing up, my parents did everything they could to give me a good life, even though we never had much money. My dad worked 2 jobs for over 20 years. His hands were always rough and worn out from labor, but when he held mine, he was the gentlest man in the world. My mum stretched every dollar as far as she could, turning small meals into feasts and making sure I never truly felt how tight money was. When I got into college with only a partial scholarship, they didn't even hesitate. They emptied what little savings they had so I could go. During those 4 years, they never once complained about the sacrifices they were making, but life had started to take its toll on them. My dad developed heart problems in his 60s, and just 8 months earlier he'd gone through triple bypass surgery. His recovery was steady, but fragile. He needed his medication every single day and couldn't push his body too far. My mum's arthritis had only gotten worse over the years. Things that most people don't even think about, like opening a door or holding a coffee cup, had become painful challenges for her. Even so, they were proud people. They stayed in the same little ranch house I grew up in, just 15 minutes away from me, and they did their best to remain independent. Despite everything, our family bond stayed strong. I never missed our Sunday dinners, and I called them every single day, sometimes during my lunch break, just to check in. They were proud of everything I achieved in my career. They even framed my very first business card and stuck it on their refrigerator as if it were a diploma. I'll never forget the day I got my first big promotion. My dad actually cried. He told me I had already exceeded all the dreams he ever had for me. I met my husband Mark 7 years ago at a marketing conference. He worked for a competing firm, but during a panel we both spoke at, his confidence and charm completely pulled me in. We hit it off instantly, bonding over creative ideas and our similar ambitions. We exchanged business cards, then met up for coffee, and soon coffee turned into dinners. Before long, we were in a whirlwind romance. Within a year, we were married. Looking back now, I realize there were warning signs at our wedding, but I brushed them aside at the time. In the beginning, marriage felt like a dream. We supported each other's careers, celebrated our wins, and bought a small starter condo together. Those weekends spent painting the walls and choosing furniture felt like we were building our perfect future. Every Sunday morning, Mark would make us breakfast, and then we'd head over to my parents' house for dinner. Back then, he seemed to really care about them. He'd bring my dad special coffee, or he'd fix small things around the house for my mum. I thought I was lucky, but the red flags came slowly, almost in ways that were easy to excuse. For example, Mark would never ignore a call from his parents. No matter what we were doing, he'd stop everything to answer them. Their opinions always seemed to outweigh mine. My first experiences with his parents, Linda and Frank, should have told me everything I needed to know. At our engagement party, they showed up wearing matching designer outfits. They looked around my parents' modest home with this fake smile that couldn't quite hide their judgment. Linda made a comment about how quaint and charming it was to see people still living so simply these days, while Frank laughed at my dad's pension plan when he asked about investments. When it came time to plan the wedding, they constantly interfered. They acted like my decisions didn't matter. I remember Linda telling me, "You clearly haven't been to many proper weddings, dear," after I picked out wildflowers for my bouquet. She actually said, Let me handle this, so you don't. Embarrassed Mark, it stung, but Mark always brushed it off, saying, that's just how they are. They mean well, they just want the best for us. And I believed him because I wanted to. Meanwhile, my career started moving faster than Mark's. I never made a big deal about it. But after 5 years at my marketing firm, I landed a huge pharmaceutical client that completely boosted our company's portfolio. I got a big promotion and a bonus. I was so excited I called Mark right away. He congratulated me, but when I came home with champagne, he looked upset. He said, great work. I guess I need to step up my game to keep up with you. I suggested we use my bonus as a down payment on a house, something we had always talked about. Suddenly, his mood lifted, and the first thing he did was call his parents to share the news. That weekend, Frank showed up with printouts of expensive neighborhoods way beyond our budget. When I suggested more affordable homes, Linda patted my hand like I was a child. She said, this is why generational wealth matters, sweetheart. You only think small because that's all you've ever known. Still, Mark and I managed to find a beautiful Tudor-style home. It was more than we planned to spend, but with my bonus, it was doable. I paid for 70% of the down payment, but Mark told me not to mention that to his parents. They just assume I'm doing well enough, he said. Why ruin it? That house meant the world to me. It had 3 bedrooms, a home office, and most importantly, a guest suite on the first floor. I specifically wanted that for my parents. I wanted them to have a comfortable place to stay as they got older. Mark didn't seem thrilled about that detail, but he agreed it was practical. When Linda and Frank first visited, they brought along a decorator without even asking. She walked through the house taking notes. Linda criticized everything: the kitchen, which had actually been remodeled only 5 years earlier, the master bedroom, even the living room. She told Mark, we'll fix all this. Your father knows people who can transform it. I stood there wondering how this was even real. When we planned our housewarming party, I worked for weeks to make it perfect. I chose food my dad could eat with his dietary restrictions. I set up comfortable seating for my mum so she could rest her legs when needed. I invited our closest friends, my co-workers who had supported me, and of course, both our parents. 3 days before the party, Mark casually said, "Oh, my mom invited a few friends." He said it would just be 4 or 5 people. I didn't want to argue, so I let it go. But something in my gut told me I should have asked more questions. The morning of the party, I woke up excited. The weather had that crisp fall chill that made everything feel cozy. I was arranging food when the doorbell rang at 12:45. I opened it and saw Linda and Frank standing there in formal clothes, like they were going to a gala. Behind them were 6 couples, all overdressed, carrying expensive wine and gifts. "Surprise," Linda said, walking right past me. "We thought we'd make a day of it." And then all these strangers poured into my home. Mark came out of the bedroom in a suit and greeted them like he had known all along. I whispered, "What's going on?" And he just said, "A slight change of plans." My mum thought it would be nice to have a proper luncheon before the evening party. From there, everything spiraled. As soon as those strangers walked into my home, I knew the day wasn't going to go the way I planned. Linda immediately started taking over. She walked straight to the living room, looked at the handmade centerpiece my mum and I had put together, and said, "These are cute, but not really appropriate." Without asking, she replaced them with these huge, expensive floral arrangements. She had brought it was like she had been planning this for weeks. I just stood there, frozen, while Frank and his friends carried in boxes of wine. They whispered to each other, laughing at the bottles I had bought, calling them cheap and saying I was still developing my taste. One of them even hid my bottles under the bar cart, like they were embarrassed for me, and then, as if that wasn't enough, a catering van pulled up in the driveway. 3 people in uniforms walked into my kitchen and started unloading trays of food I hadn't ordered. "We thought your little grocery store platters were sweet, but not really enough for this kind of crowd," Frank said, acting like he had done me a favor. The housewarming party I had spent weeks planning, something that was supposed to feel warm and personal, was being turned into some kind of high-end networking event for my in-laws. Mark stayed busy the whole time, running around, with his dad setting up a bar, giving people tours of the house. He wouldn't even look at me. I felt like a stranger in my own home. The last straw for me came when I overheard Linda talking to a woman wearing more diamonds than I'd ever seen in my life. She said, "We always knew Mark would end up in this neighborhood. Of course, the house will need some upgrades if they want to start a family. That guest suite would be much better as a library." That guest suite was the room I had chosen specifically for my parents. At that point, I pulled Mark into the bedroom. He was changing into a new shirt, getting even more dressed up, and I just snapped. "What is happening, Mark? Who are these people? Why is your mum rearranging everything in our home and talking about renovations we never discussed?" He looked at me like I was the problem and said, "You're overreacting. These are important people. Mom just got a little excited, that's all. It's coming from a good place." "A good place," I shot back. "There are caterers in my kitchen I didn't hire. Your mom is talking about tearing apart the guest suite for a library when that room is supposed to be for my parents. Speaking of my parents, I need to leave in a little while to pick them up." For a second, I saw something like panic cross his face. Then he said, "About that. Mum thought it might be better if your parents came another time." This turned into more of a formal business dinner. I couldn't believe my ears. "This is our housewarming, Mark, not your mum's party. My parents are coming, and I don't care what kind of people your mum invited. They're going to be welcomed here, and I expect you to treat them with respect." Just then, Linda popped her head in. "Everything okay, honey? Senator Wilson is asking about your work on that campaign." And just like that, Mark left with her, not saying another word to me. I reminded him before I left, "I'm going to get my parents now. Don't forget, Dad needs his medication in the fridge, and Mum will need her chair." He barely looked up and muttered, Sure. When I got to my parents' house, they were dressed in their Sunday best. My mum had even gone to the salon to have her hair done. My dad wore the sweater I had given him for Christmas the year before. "So, is the house ready for the big reveal?" Dad asked, smiling. "It looks wonderful," I lied, forcing a smile of my own. I didn't want to worry them. "Everyone is so excited to see you." But as we drove back, my stomach tightened more and more. Mark wasn't answering my calls, and I had a bad feeling. When we turned onto our street, I knew something was wrong. Cars I didn't recognize lined the entire street. A young man in a valet uniform walked up to my car. "Sorry, ma'am, the driveway is full. Are you here for the Cunningham dinner?" "This is my house," I said, my voice sharp. He looked embarrassed and stepped aside so I could park in the last space near the garage. Music and laughter spilled out of the house. It sounded like there were far more people than the 12 or so I had left behind. My mum looked at me and said, "Goodness, how many people did you invite, Laura?" "Not this many," I admitted, helping her out of the car while Dad slowly got out of the passenger seat. By now, the temperature had dropped. The sun was going down, and it was freezing outside. My parents only had on light jackets, enough for a quick walk from car to house, but not to stand outside. I rang the doorbell. The chime echoed inside, but no one came. I rang again, then knocked, watching through the glass as people walked by. They could see us, but they ignored us. "Maybe they can't hear us over the music," Mum said, pulling her jacket tighter. I tried the key in the lock, but it didn't work. That's when it hit me someone had changed the locks to my own house. I pulled out my phone and called Mark, straight to voicemail. I sent a text, We're outside. The door is locked. My key doesn't work. Dad needs to come in now. No reply. 5 minutes passed, then 10. My dad's face was pale now, and I could see him pressing his hand to his chest. "Dad, are you okay?" I asked. "Just a little winded," he said, but his voice was strained. My mum was shivering hard now, her lips turning blue. Panic rose inside me. I told them to sit while I tried the back. When I walked around, I couldn't believe what I saw. The back patio had been turned into a full outdoor party with heat lamps, champagne, and string lights I'd never seen before. Guests in expensive clothes were laughing and sipping drinks. Through the window, I spotted Linda at the center of it all, entertaining everyone like it was her house. I knocked on the back door. A server walked over, annoyed. "The entrance is in the front," he said. "This is my house," I snapped. "My parents are freezing outside. My dad has a heart condition. Let me in." He looked unsure, glancing back at Linda. She came over, saw me, and frowned. "Oh, Laura," I thought Mark explained. "We had to make adjustments to the guest list. This dinner is important for Frank's business contacts." "Open the door, Linda," I demanded. "My parents are outside, freezing. My dad needs his medicine. Right now, this really isn't a good time," she said coldly. "Maybe you could take them to dinner and come back later. We'll be done by 11. I stared at her, stunned at the cruelty in her voice. Through the window, I saw Mark laughing with a group of men, drink in hand, completely ignoring us. I ran back to the front. My dad was sitting on the steps, his breathing heavy, my mum rubbing his hands trying to warm him. A neighbor noticed and brought us a blanket, asking if we were okay. "We're locked out," I said, wrapping the blanket around my mum. "My dad needs his medicine inside." He tried to wave it off, but I could see the pain on his face. I was desperate now. I ran around the house, looking for any way in. Finally, I spotted a basement window slightly open. It was small, but I didn't care. I squeezed through, tearing my shirt and scraping my arm. I landed hard on the basement floor, but I ran upstairs, as fast as I could. When I got to the living room, it was like walking into a stranger's house. Our furniture was gone, replaced with rented pieces. Servers carried trays. A bartender mixed drinks in the dining room. I didn't even stop. I ran to the front door, unlocked it, and pulled my parents inside. My dad's face was grey, my mum shaking uncontrollably. I grabbed his medication from the fridge, helped him take it, and sat them down on the sofa that had been shoved against the wall. The room fell quiet. People stared at us like we were intruders. Linda stormed over and hissed, "What do you think you're doing? We have the governor's assistant here tonight." "This is my house, Linda," I shot back. "You locked my parents out in freezing weather. My dad has a heart condition. Do you understand what you've done?" She waved her hand dismissively. There was clearly a miscommunication. We assumed they'd come later. "They've been outside for over 30 minutes, I snapped. "Because someone changed the locks without telling me." She didn't even look guilty. "The locks needed upgrading." Mark agreed. "Where is Mark?" I demanded. She gestured toward the kitchen. "Discussing business with Frank's associates. Don't disturb him with this." I stormed into the kitchen and found Mark laughing with 3 older men. When he saw me, his smile dropped. "My dad nearly collapsed outside," I said. "Why? Didn't you answer your phone?" "There must have been a mix-up," he said quickly. "We thought maybe your parents could come another time mix-up." I cut him off. "My parents were outside in the cold, locked out of their own daughter's house, because of your parents." Before he could answer, I heard a commotion. We ran to the living room. My dad was slumped against my mum, clutching his chest. "Chest hurts," he gasped. My mum was crying, panicking. "He says it feels like last time, like his heart attack." I pulled out my phone and dialed 911 without hesitation. The room went silent when I called 911. Guests stood frozen, holding their wine glasses, staring like they were watching a show they didn't pay for. I could hear my dad's strained breathing as I gave the operator our address. Nancy-yes, Linda. But at that moment I could barely think of her as family rushed to Mark's side, whispering harshly, "Can't this wait? You're embarrassing us in front of everyone." I turned on her, my phone still at my ear. "My father is having a heart attack because you left him in the freezing cold. Do you understand that, Linda? He could die." Frank joined in, his face red from either the wine or anger. "Now hold on, there's no need for hysterics. He looks fine to me, just a little winded." A few guests shifted uncomfortably, but no one stepped in. They just stood there, watching, sipping their drinks, pretending this wasn't life and death. Within minutes, the paramedics arrived. They pushed through the crowd without a second glance, heading straight to my dad. Their faces told me everything. Hadn't overreacted. He was showing signs of both hypothermia and cardiac distress. They strapped him onto a stretcher, checking his vitals and oxygen as they rushed him out. My mum clutched his hand, her face pale and wet with tears. I held on to her, promising we would follow Dot as we moved through the doorway. I could still hear Frank complaining to Mark, "What a scene you've caused. This will ruin the whole evening." I wanted to scream. I climbed into the ambulance with my parents, holding my mum's hand as the paramedics worked over my dad. His skin was so pale, his lips still bluish. Every second in that ambulance felt like an hour. When we reached the hospital, nurses rushed him into the emergency room. They gave my mum a recliner so she could sit by his side, wrapped her in warm blankets, and gave her hot tea to help her stop shaking. I answered questions for the doctors, explaining he'd been outside for at least 30 minutes in freezing weather. The doctor frowned. "With his history, that's dangerously long. He's stable for now, but we'll keep him overnight." The exposure put a lot of strain on his heart. My mum's test results showed she had mild hypothermia too. They treated her with warm fluids and wouldn't let her leave his side. Finally, close to midnight, they were both resting. I sat in the chair across from them, watching them breathe, tears finally spilling down my face. And then my phone buzzed. It was Mark. "Are you coming home soon?" he asked casually, like he was asking if I'd picked up groceries. "My dad is in the hospital," I whispered angrily. "He's staying overnight for observation. My mum is being treated for hypothermia. I'm staying with them." There was a pause. Then Mark said, "The party is winding down. Your dramatic exit was quite the topic of conversation." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Dramatic exit. "Mark, my father nearly had another heart attack. Do you understand that? Mum says he was just cold and tired. You know how your parents exaggerate their health issues for attention." Something inside me snapped. I had been bending, excusing, forgiving for years. But this was the line. "Mark," I said, my voice calm but hard, "don't be there when I get home tomorrow. I mean it." "You're being irrational," he said. Quickly, my parents went to a lot of trouble for tonight. They were trying to help me. The least you could do is be grateful. Grateful, I almost laughed through the tears. "Your parents locked mine out of my house in the freezing cold. They nearly killed my dad. They humiliated my mum. And you let them. You stood there, drinking and laughing while it happened." Before he could say another word, I hung up the next day. After my dad was stable and the doctors assured me he'd be okay, I went back to the house. My stomach twisted as I turned the key in the door. Yes, I'd gotten one from the hospital, where the paramedics had given me back my purse and keys. But when I stepped inside, it was like walking into a crime scene. The party mess was everywhere. Wine stains on the carpet, cigarette burns on the coffee table Mark and I had picked out. Together, empty glasses shoved into corners. Mark sat at the kitchen island, looking exhausted but defensive. Linda and Frank were still there, lounging on the sofa like they owned the place. You finally decided to come home, Linda said, her tone sharp and dismissive. I ignored her and looked straight at Mark. How's my father? Did you even bother to call and check? He looked guilty for a second, then muttered, I figured you'd let me know if there was any change. Linda stood up, smoothing her slacks. Well, now that this little drama is over, we should talk about last night. Despite your unfortunate exit, it was a great success. Senator Wilson's aide said he might connect Mark with their media team. I just stared at her, feeling like I was in some kind of alternate reality. My father is in the hospital because of you, and all you care about is networking. Now, Laura, Frank said smoothly. Your father already had health issues. That's not our fault. If anything, you shouldn't have brought him to an evening event. An event, I snapped. It was supposed to be my housewarming party. I planned everything with his health in mind before you hijacked it. We didn't hijack anything, Linda said, waving her hand like I was a child. We simply elevated it. You should be thanking us. I turned to Mark. Is that true? Did you agree to change the locks without telling me? He shifted uncomfortably. Mum thought we needed better security. I was going to give you the new keys, but I forgot. And the caterers, the valet, 40 strangers in my living room. I may have mentioned we were having a small housewarming, he admitted. Mum offered to make it special. My voice shook. Mark, they took over our house. They erased me from my own home. They treated my parents like garbage, and you let them. Linda scoffed. You're being sentimental. This house has potential to be a real, entertaining space. Those little crafts and photos are fine for private rooms, but not for when people visit. This is a private home, I said firmly. Not a stage for you. Of course it is, dear, she said with that fake, sugary smile. But Mark understands the importance of standards. His father and I have connections that could help. Did you know they were planning this? I asked Mark directly. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Mum mentioned maybe hosting their annual dinner here. I didn't realize it would be last night. When did you know? I pressed. He hesitated when they showed up with the first guests. And you didn't think to call me? To warn me? I knew you'd be upset, he said softly, as if that excused everything. That was the moment it hit me. It wasn't just about the party. It wasn't just about the locks, or the catering, or even the house. It was about the man I married. He had chosen them over me, over my parents, over basic decency. I'm packing a bag, I said quietly. Linda jumped in, her voice sharp. Don't be dramatic, Laura. Every marriage has its adjustments. Mark is simply balancing family obligations. Family obligations. I turned to her, my voice shaking with anger. Is that what you call leaving my father to freeze? Is that what you call humiliating my mother? Taking over my home? We did you a favor, Frank said sternly. This house is clearly more than you can handle. Mark told us you insisted on decorating it yourself, even though you're inexperienced. I didn't even respond. I went upstairs, pulled out a suitcase, and started throwing clothes inside. Mark stood in the doorway, watching, saying nothing. Finally, he spoke. Where will you go? To my parents. Then to Vanessa's, I said. Don't call me unless it's a real emergency. Linda appeared behind him, her face twisted into fake concern. Running away never solves anything, dear. Young wives often get overwhelmed. It's normal. I walked past them both without looking back. When I reached Vanessa's apartment that night, I finally broke down. I cried harder than I had in years. I told her everything, every detail. She listened in horror. They changed your locks without telling you, she said, shocked, and left your parents outside. Laura, that's not just wrong, it's illegal. She was right. And I knew in that moment things would never go back to the way they were. At Vanessa's place, I finally let myself cry until my chest hurt. I had been holding everything in at the hospital for my parents' sake, but now, safe with my best friend, I couldn't keep it in anymore. Between sobs, I explained every detail: the locks, the catering, my dad nearly collapsing, the way Linda and Frank acted like nothing was wrong. Vanessa, who also happened to be a family lawyer, shook her head in disbelief. "Laura, this isn't just disrespectful. It's serious. They changed the locks on a house you own. They left your elderly parents outside in dangerous weather. They could be in real legal trouble for this." Her words hit me like a wave. I'd been thinking about it as betrayal, about how humiliated and angry I felt. But hearing her call it illegal made something inside me shift. This wasn't just about emotions anymore, it was about protecting myself and my parents. The next morning, I opened our joint bank account online, needing some sense of control. Instead, I felt like the floor fell out from under me. Almost $40,000 had been withdrawn just 3 days before the party. And it wasn't just a transfer to another account, it was cash. My heart pounded as I called the bank. The clerk confirmed it was Mark, in person. He'd told them it was for home improvements. I wanted to throw up. When I went digging further, I found something else in our shared cloud account. A receipt for catering services totaling $22,000 billed to Frank, and it wasn't even under Mark's name. That's when I realized this wasn't just my in-laws taking over a party. This was planned, paid for, executed behind my back. I called Olivia, a close friend from work, and explained everything. She didn't even hesitate. "I'm putting you in touch with my brother's firm. He's a financial advisor. You need to protect yourself." By the end of that day, I was sitting in a downtown office with a man named Daniel, who calmly explained the truth. "You're the primary name on the mortgage, Laura. You contributed 70% of the down payment. That gives you leverage. But right now, your husband has drained most of your liquid savings. You need to take steps immediately to secure what's yours." It was overwhelming, but at the same time, I felt a spark of strength. For too long, I had let Mark and his parents bulldoze me. No more. Over the next few days, while my dad recovered in the hospital, I started putting the pieces together. Every day, new evidence of just how far this had gone surfaced. The biggest shock came from an unexpected call from Mark's sister, Rachel. She had always kept her distance, polite but not particularly close to me. Her voice cracked as soon as I answered. "I heard what happened. Laura, I'm so sorry. They did the exact same thing to me and James 3 years ago." She explained that after she and her husband bought their first home, Linda and Frank had slowly inserted themselves. First, they moved in temporarily after the baby was born. Then they started making decisions for them: decorating, finances, even childcare. By the time they left, Rachel said bitterly, "My marriage was hanging by a thread. They convinced James I couldn't handle it. They nearly broke us." I sat in silence, realizing this wasn't a one-off nightmare. This was a pattern. They had done it before, and they'd do it again if I let them. The whole talk about turning our guest suite into a library suddenly clicked. They weren't joking. They were planning to live there, at least part-time. That made me sick. That's when my grief and humiliation began transforming into something else: determination. I wasn't just going to protect myself. I was going to make sure they never had the chance to hurt my parents again. A week later, I was ready. Vanessa had helped me line everything up: legal paperwork, documentation, even a police escort. I arranged for a locksmith to meet me at the house when I knew Mark would be at work. When I walked up to my front door with the officer, I finally felt like I had control again. "I'm the primary owner," I explained. "My in-laws changed the locks without my consent." The locksmith got to work, and within 20 minutes, every lock was changed. I reset the alarm codes to dot inside. I found proof that made my blood boil. In the guest room closet were garment bags full of Linda's clothing. Her expensive skincare products lined the bathroom counter. It looked like she had already moved in. Even worse, in Mark's home office, I found a folder labeled House. Modifications inside were contractor quotes for massive renovations, including tearing apart the guest suite, converting my office into another bedroom, and plans for future entertaining spaces. But the worst piece was a half-filled change of address form for Frank and Linda, listing my house as their new residence. They had been planning this since we bought the house, and Mark never said a word. I took photos of everything, every document, every receipt. Vanessa told me to keep a record of it all. Then I called Mark, telling him we needed to meet. But not at home, not anywhere near home. I set the meeting at Vanessa's law office. Neutral ground. When he showed up with Linda and Frank, they were furious. Frank grumbled, "This is unnecessary. Family matters should be handled privately." Partner, who joined us, smiled calmly. Unfortunately, when locks are changed without consent and large sums of money are withdrawn without discussion, we're no longer talking about just family disagreements. We're talking about legal matters. I laid it all out. The party, the medical bills, the money, the locks, the evidence of their plans to move in. Linda rolled her eyes. Mark was simply securing funds for improvements that will increase the property's value. You should be thanking him. My attorney slid my dad's medical report across the table. Words like cardiac distress and hypothermic symptoms were underlined. "Elder endangerment," she said firmly. "That's what this could fall under. And you do not want that on your record." Linda went pale. Frank stammered. Mark just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Finally he said, "What do you want, Laura? Tell me what it'll take to resolve this." I looked him straight in the eyes. I had thought long and hard about it. 1. All the money you withdrew goes back into our account. 2. No changes to this house happen without both of us signing off. 3. Your parents will not have access to this house unless we both agree. 4. They pay every dime of my dad's medical bills from that night. Linda hissed, "This is extortion." "No," I said calmly. "This is accountability." For the first time in years, Mark surprised me. He looked at his parents and said quietly, "We'll return the money, and we'll cover the medical bills." Frank's face turned bright red. Linda gasped like she'd been slapped. "Robert," she started, but Mark cut her off. "You left her parents in the cold. He could have died. Do you know how that would have looked for your precious reputation?" Silence filled the room. That meeting was a turning point. Not just legally, but emotionally. Mark had finally chosen me, at least in that moment, over them. But I knew words weren't enough. After that meeting in Vanessa's office, everything shifted. On paper, it felt like a win. Mark agreed to return the money, cover my dad's medical bills, and set boundaries with his parents. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Words can sound good in a conference room, but living with the reality is another thing. The very next day, Mark wired the money back into our account. I saw the balance restored, and for a moment, relief washed over me. At least financially, I wasn't ruined. They also sent over a check for my dad's hospital. Expenses, signed by Frank himself. But that wasn't an act of kindness, it was self-preservation. They didn't want elder endangerment hanging over their heads, and while the logistics were being fixed, the damage inside me was still raw. I couldn't bring myself to stay in that house. Every corner of it felt tainted, like I could still see the strangers drinking expensive wine in my living room, laughing while my parents froze outside. I stayed with Vanessa for weeks, splitting my time between her apartment and the hospital as my dad slowly regained strength. Mark kept trying to talk to me, calling or texting. Sometimes he sounded apologetic. Other times he acted like I was, blowing things out of proportion. I ignored most of his calls. I wasn't ready. But the truth was, Mark did start changing in one small but important way. He agreed to therapy. At my insistence, he began seeing a counselor who specialized in family dynamics. The first time we met for coffee after one of his sessions, he looked shaken. I didn't realize how much control they had over me, he admitted. Everything, Laura. My schools, my career, even who I dated before you. They taught me to avoid conflict by giving in. I thought I was keeping peace, but really, I was just letting them run my life. I wanted to believe him, but trust doesn't come back overnight. Meanwhile, the social consequences for Linda and Frank started rolling in, and honestly, I wasn't ashamed to admit it felt satisfying. Word got out about what happened that night, not from me, but from whispers among that precious circle. My attorney had been very careful with her language, making sure people knew about the elder endangerment angle. That phrase carried weight. Soon, invitations to their usual high society parties dried up. A couple of boards they sat on quietly didn't renew their terms. They went from being the couple who hosted glamorous dinners to the couple people whispered about in hallways. Rachel, my sister-in-law, reached out again. This time, she brought her brothers into the conversation. For the first time, the siblings actually compared stories openly. Each one had been through some version of what I went through. Boundary violations, manipulation. But they'd never connected the dots before. Hearing them share was like watching a dam break. For Mark, that was eye-opening. He wasn't just hearing it from me anymore, his own siblings confirmed it. And slowly, I saw him begin to separate his loyalty to them from his sense of identity. But for me, the question wasn't just about him. It was about me, my parents, and my future. Could I ever trust him again after he chose their comfort over my parents' safety? For now, I focused on rebuilding. I threw myself into work, where surprisingly, the crisis gave me a new edge. My perspective had changed. I didn't get rattled as easily. My team even commented that I seemed stronger, more certain, I guess. Almost losing my dad put office drama into perspective. Still, at night, when I sat in Vanessa's guest room, the loneliness crept in. I missed having my own home. I missed routines with Mark, even though I was furious with him. And most of all, I missed believing I could trust the person I married. 3 weeks after the Partied disaster, I finally returned to the house, alone. I unlocked the new locks with my new keys and walked inside. The silence was heavy, but it was mine. The first thing I did was strip away everything Linda had touched. The fancy floral arrangements, gone. The rented decor, returned. The cigarette-burned coffee table, hauled to the curb. Piece by piece, I reclaimed the house, making it feel like mine again. The guest suite, thank God, was still intact. I deep-cleaned it, replaced the bedding, and set it up just as I'd originally planned for my parents. When they were well enough to visit again, I wanted them to feel comfortable and safe. That night, I sat in the quiet living room, wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea. For the first time since the chaos, I felt a flicker of peace, but peace didn't mean resolution. When Mark came over that weekend, we sat across from each other at the kitchen table like strangers. "I know you don't trust me right now," he said softly. "I don't blame you. What I did was unforgivable, but I want to change. I've been going to therapy every week. I've set boundaries with them." "What does that even mean, Mark?" I asked. My voice cracked. "You watched them humiliate my parents. You watched my dad collapse, and you didn't stop it. How do I ever forgive that?" He looked down, his hands shaking slightly. "I don't know, but I'll keep proving myself until you decide. Even if that means you never take me back." Was the first time I heard him speak without defending his parents. The first time he didn't minimize it. And part of me just, a small part, wondered if maybe he really could change. But I didn't say that out loud. Over the next few months, I kept my distance. I focused on my parents. My dad slowly regained strength with his medications and checkups. My mum's arthritis still gave her trouble, but emotionally, she was bouncing back. We rebuilt our Sunday dinners, sometimes at their house, sometimes at mine. Each time, I made sure to remind them the guest suite was theirs whenever they needed it. I'll never forget what my mum told me one quiet evening after dinner. She took my hand, her voice gentle. "We never doubted you'd make things right, Laura. Even that night, when we were so scared, we knew our daughter wouldn't let us down." Her faith in me was like fuel, and slowly I started to feel like myself again. Stronger, clearer, less willing to bend for the sake of appearances. Mark kept going to therapy. He kept showing up when I allowed it, bringing groceries for my parents, fixing things around their house, never once complaining. He told me his counselor had him dig into childhood memories, times when his parents rewarded obedience and punished independence. "I never realized how deep it went," he admitted one afternoon, "but I don't want to be that person anymore. I don't want to lose you." I listened, but I didn't promise anything. Trust isn't a switch you flip. Meanwhile, Linda and Frank's empire of influence crumbled further. Without their constant social events, they lost visibility. The whispers followed them. Their arrogance had finally cost them something they valued, their reputation, and that, maybe more than anything, was justice. But for me, the bigger victory wasn't watching them fall. It was knowing I had survived. I had stood up for myself and my parents, and I wasn't going to stop. 6 months after that night, life looked completely different. Not perfect, not magically healed, but different in a way that made me feel stronger. My dad's health had stabilized. His cardiologist said his heart function was back to baseline, though he'd need to stay careful for the rest of his life. My mom's arthritis was still a daily struggle, but she was managing. The trauma of that night had left scars, but together we were building new memories to cover the pain. Every Sunday dinner felt like a victory. Sometimes I'd host at my house, other times at theirs. My dad would bring me coffee, prepared exactly the way I liked it, or clip articles from the newspaper he thought I'd enjoy. My mum would smile at me with that look that said, "We trust you, we believe in you." That faith became my anchor. At work, I noticed a shift in myself. I no longer stressed about every little thing. I could tell the difference between what was truly urgent and what was just noise. My team picked up on it too. They said I seemed more grounded, more confident. In truth, almost losing my dad had forced me to see clearly. Nothing at work could compare to what really mattered: family, health, respect. But even as life moved forward, the shadow of Mark lingered. We weren't living together. I still stayed at Vanessa's or sometimes at my parents' place, but we met occasionally, carefully, in neutral spaces. He was still going to therapy, still trying to untangle himself from the grip his parents had on him. I've never stood up to them before, he admitted one afternoon as we sat across from each other in a quiet coffee shop. I always thought I was keeping the peace, but all I was doing was letting them control me. And then I dragged you into that. I looked at him, trying to decide if I could believe him. He seemed different, humbled, shaken, even ashamed. But could someone like him really change? I didn't answer that day. Instead, I told him the truth. Trust takes time, and right now, I'm not ready to give it back to you. Meanwhile, Linda and Frank were facing their own downfall. Their reputation in their communities, something they valued above everything else, was unraveling. Invitations to their beloved dinner parties stopped. Positions on local boards quietly disappeared. People whispered about that incident with Laura's parents and the elder endangerment situation. They hated it, but there was nothing they could do. And honestly, I didn't feel sorry for them. Back at my house, I worked room by room to reclaim my space. The formal decorations Linda had shoved in, donated, the rented pieces she thought were elevations sent back. the cigarette-burned coffee table, replaced with one I picked out myself. For the first time, the house truly felt like mine, not theirs, not even Mark's. Mine, the guest suite, my sanctuary for my parents, stayed exactly as I'd designed it. Every time they visited, I made sure they had everything they needed: blankets, comfortable chairs, easy access to the kitchen. I wasn't just protecting them physically. I was protecting the promise I'd made to myself. They would never be treated like that again. Still, part of me wrestled with the question I couldn't escape. Could I rebuild with Mark, or was this the end of our marriage? I had separation papers prepared, not because I was ready to file, but because I needed a safety net, a way out if I decided I couldn't forgive him. When we talked, Mark didn't beg me not to go. He didn't try to minimize what happened anymore. Instead, he said things like, "If you want to divorce me, I understand. What I did was unforgivable. But I need you to know I'm changing whether we stay together or not. I don't want to be that man anymore." That honesty surprised me, but it didn't erase the image of my dad slumped on the porch, lips blue, while Mark laughed inside with a glass in his hand. So I waited. I didn't make a decision right away. Meanwhile, Vanessa kept reminding me, boundaries aren't about punishment. They're about protection. I held on to that. I wasn't trying to punish Mark or even his parents anymore. I was protecting myself, my parents, and the life I wanted. The first test of those boundaries came sooner than I expected. Linda and Frank requested a visit, not to stay, just to drop by. Part of me wanted to slam the door forever, but another part of me knew it was important to show them the rules had changed, so I agreed on my terms. 1 hour at my house, with me present the entire time. When they arrived, they were different, quieter, almost awkward. Linda, who usually led with criticism, looked around the living room and said, stiffly, "Your home is lovely, dear." The words sounded foreign in her mouth, like she had to force them out. "Thank you," I said simply. No extra warmth, no fake smile, just polite acknowledgement. The whole visit was tense, but necessary. They needed to see the new reality. This was my house, my rules, and any violation would have immediate consequences. Part of the agreement from the lawyer's office was that they had to reimburse every dime of the medical expenses from that night. They hated it, but they complied. That was non-negotiable. For me, they had nearly killed my father. Covering the bills was the bare minimum for me. The bigger transformation wasn't about the money or the house. It was inside me. I discovered strength I didn't know I had. For years I thought setting boundaries made me mean or selfish. Now I understood the truth. Boundaries aren't walls, they're shields. They protect the people you love, and they protect your peace. Work. I found myself mentoring younger women on the same thing. Without going into personal details, I told them stories about recognizing manipulation, about standing firm, about knowing your worth. One colleague even told me, "You seemed different, more certain somehow." I smiled and said, "I learned that protecting what matters isn't selfish, it's necessary." Creating a new normal took time. Slowly, my house became a reflection of who I really was, not a battleground for my in-laws' ambitions. My friendships with people like Vanessa and Olivia deepened, and shallow relationships, the ones that only existed for appearances, quietly faded away. And through it all, the question of Mark remained. We weren't back together, but we weren't fully apart either. He was working on himself, and I was watching, carefully, to see if his actions matched his words. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of uncertainty, because I knew, no matter what happened with Mark, I could stand on my own, and I knew one thing for sure. I would never, ever let anyone endanger my parents again. 3 months into living separately, Mark and I started testing the waters of what reconciliation might look like. Not rushing back into old habits, not sweeping things under the rug, but slowly, carefully, seeing if anything was left worth saving. It wasn't easy. Every time I looked at him, a part of me still saw that night the glass in his hand, the laughter while my parents shivered outside. But another part of me saw the man sitting across from me now, humbled, broken in some ways, but trying, really trying. He told me about therapy sessions in detail, not because I asked, but because he wanted to be transparent. Dr. Harrison had me think about the first choices I ever made as a kid. He explained one afternoon over coffee. And you know what I realized? I don't remember ever making choices. Everything was decided for me. What school, what sports, even what friends. My parents framed obedience as love, and I carried that into adulthood. I thought letting them run things meant I was being a good son. I never realized how much it was hurting you, or me. I listened, quietly, unsure of what to say. Therapy had cracked something open in him, but words weren't enough. I needed to see actions, so I gave him conditions. If he wanted a chance at reconciliation, there would be rules. No unsupervised visits with his parents. No financial moves without my consent. No more secrets. And if his parents disrespected me, my parents, or our home even once, contact would be cut immediately. He agreed. No hesitation. The first test came when Linda and Frank asked to stop by again. This time, I made it clear they would only be allowed inside if Mark was present and if they understood the boundaries. When they arrived, I could see the tension in their faces. Linda wore her usual flawless outfit, but the confidence she used to carry was gone. Frank looked stiff, like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Your home is lovely, Laura," Linda said again, almost like it pained her. "Thank you," I replied. My voice, even Mark stood beside me. Not saying much, but his presence mattered. For once, he wasn't caught between us. He was on my side. The visit was awkward, quiet, and short, and that was fine with me. They needed to see that the old ways were gone. There would be no more taking over, no more control. Meanwhile, Mark kept doing the small things that mattered. He called my dad regularly to check in. He drove my mum to her doctor's appointments when I couldn't. He never mentioned his parents without also mentioning boundaries. And while I appreciated it, I also kept my walls up. Trust wasn't something you rebuild in weeks or even months. It takes time, and I wasn't ready to give it fully. At work, life was steady, almost thriving. My colleagues noticed a change in me, the way I held myself differently. "You seem more certain," one said during a tough meeting. And it was true. I had found my voice, not just in my personal life, but in my career too. Even at home, I felt the difference. The house was mine again, room by room. The warmth returned, not the staged perfection Linda had tried to impose, but the comfort of a home filled with things that reflected me and my family. But I'll admit sometimes, late at night, I felt a pang of loneliness. I missed the closeness of a marriage, the simple comfort of having someone beside me. That's when the hardest part of this journey revealed itself. Not just deciding if Mark could change, but deciding if I even wanted to let him try. Because forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about whether you're willing to risk opening your heart again. The in-laws, meanwhile, were facing more consequences than I could have ever imagined. Their reputation had taken a real hit. They weren't invited to the charity galas they once bragged about. Their so-called friends whispered behind their backs. Even their social media, which Linda used to curate like a glossy magazine, grew quiet. No more photos of dinner parties. No more boasting about connections. Rachel called me one evening and said, "They're spiraling, Laura. They've never been ignored like this before. It's driving them crazy." I couldn't help but feel a small sense of justice. They had cared so much about appearances, about how the world saw them. And now that world was shutting them out. But here's the thing. I didn't gloat. I didn't dance on their downfall, because by then I had learned the real lesson: revenge doesn't heal. Boundaries do. One moment that stays with me happened about 4 months after that awful night. Mark and I were sitting in couples counseling, and the therapist asked him, "What's your biggest fear in this marriage now?" Mark looked at me, his eyes raw, that she'd never be able to forgive me. And honestly, I don't blame her if she doesn't, but my fear isn't about losing the marriage, it's about losing her trust forever. Because I realize now that trust was everything. I didn't answer right away, but later, as I drove home, I thought about how far we'd come. We weren't healed, we weren't back to where we once were, but we were moving forward carefully. As for my parents, they continued to be my center. My dad joked sometimes, calling me his little warrior. My mum reminded me to forgive without forgetting. They were my compass, keeping me grounded in what really mattered. Looking back, I realized something important. That night had revealed everyone's true character. My parents' resilience, my in-laws' cruelty, my husband's weakness, and maybe, just maybe, his potential to grow. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next, because I knew one thing with absolute certainty: no matter what happened with Mark, I would never lose myself again. 6 months after that night, life had settled into a new rhythm. Not the same rhythm I had before, but one that felt stronger, more real. My parents were doing better. My dad's health stabilized with careful medication and regular checkups. He still got tired easily, but he was back to cracking jokes and clipping out articles from the newspaper to hand me at Sunday dinners. My mum, though her arthritis hadn't improved, had found ways to adjust, and she never let her pain keep her from smiling when we were all together. Our bond as a family had grown deeper. We'd gone through something that could have broken us, but instead it reminded us what we meant to each other. Every Sunday dinner wasn't just a meal, it was proof that we had survived, that we had each other no matter what. My house, once a battlefield, became a sanctuary again. I took my time reclaiming it. The guest suite remained untouched, always ready for my parents. The kitchen felt warm again, filled with the smells of food I prepared myself, not trays of catered meals. The living room had our photos back where they belonged. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, felt like me again. And through it all, Mark remained in the picture, but on probation. We weren't living together. We weren't pretending everything was fine. Instead, we were building something new from the ground up. He kept going to therapy every week. He kept showing up not just for me, but for my parents too. He never missed a check-in call with my dad. He fixed things around their house without being asked. He drove my mum to an appointment once when I couldn't, and when she thanked him, he didn't brush it off or act like a hero. He just said, "It's the least I can do." In couples counseling, he admitted things that shocked me. "I thought obedience was the only way to get love," he said once. "But now I know love without respect isn't love at all." Did that erase the past? No. Did it guarantee our future? No. But it showed me that he was finally learning lessons his parents had tried to keep from him his whole life. As for Linda and Frank, their downfall was slow and steady. Their social standing, something they had worked their whole lives to polish, crumbled. Invitations dried up. Former friends avoided them. Their names stopped appearing in charity newsletters or on event boards. Rachel told me once, almost whispering, "It's strange to see them this way. For so long, they acted like they were untouchable. Now, they're just people, and not very nice ones." I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. By then, I had realized something important. Their punishment wasn't my job. Life had a way of handling people like them. And honestly, the silence of their empty calendar was louder than any revenge I could have planned. What mattered to me was that I had protected my parents, that I had stood up, even when it was terrifying, that I had drawn a line in the sand and refused to let anyone cross it again. Looking back, the biggest transformation wasn't in Mark or even in my in-laws, it was in me. I had always thought being nice meant keeping the peace, avoiding conflict, bending to make other people comfortable. But now I understood. Being nice without boundaries isn't kindness, it's surrender. And I wasn't going to surrender anymore. I learned that boundaries don't push love away, they protect it. They create safe spaces where real relationships can grow free from manipulation and fear. At work, I found myself mentoring younger colleagues on this exact idea, not sharing every detail of my story, but giving advice like, if someone disrespects you, it's not your job to make them comfortable. It's your job to protect your peace. One day, after a tough client meeting, my co-worker Jordan said, "You seem different, more sure of yourself, like nothing can shake you." And I smiled. I learned that protecting what matters isn't selfish. It's necessary. Mark and I continued our slow, cautious rebuilding. Some days, I thought maybe we had a chance. Other days, I wondered if the cracks were too deep, and that was okay. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of either outcome. If we made it, it would be on new terms, equal, respectful, boundaried. If we didn't, I knew I'd be fine on my own. My parents' faith in me gave me strength. My friends' support gave me perspective, and my own courage gave me peace. One evening, as I sat with my parents after dinner, my mum squeezed my hand and said softly, "You know, even that night when we were freezing outside, I knew our daughter would fix it. We never doubted you." I felt tears sting my eyes. "I don't know if I fixed it, Mum, but I promise you I'll never let it happen again." She smiled. That's all a parent could ever want. So here's what I've learned. Family isn't defined by blood alone. It's defined by respect, care, and love that shows up when it matters most. The people who truly deserve a place in your life are the ones who honor your boundaries and value your well-being. Sometimes those people are relatives, and sometimes they're friends who become family by choice. Standing up for yourself and your loved ones isn't revenge, it's survival. It's love in its truest form. Because when crisis strikes, you see who people really are. And once you know, you can't unsee it. I don't carry bitterness now. I carry wisdom. I don't carry anger. I carry clarity. Looking forward, I know my future will be built on mutual respect, not appearances. On care, not control. On love, not manipulation. The journey wasn't easy, but I came out stronger, braver, and more certain of who I am. And if there's one thing I want others to take from my story, it's this. Protect what truly matters. Set boundaries without guilt. And never ever be afraid to stand up for the people you love, because love without respect isn't love at all.